The maid's voice trembled as she stared at the portrait. The mansion sat in Connecticut like old money always does: gray stone, iron gates, and silence in every room. Grace Mitchell had worked here 2 months, long enough to know which floorboards creaked, which rooms stayed locked, and which questions you didn't ask. The head butler barely looked up when he gave her the assignment. "Mr. Hawthorne wants the covered portrait cleaned. His wife's birthday celebration tonight." Grace nodded. Just another task. The white cloth came off easily. Then everything stopped. Not because of the gold frame or the brushwork, because of the boy staring back at her. 7 years old, navy sweater vest, blonde hair combed to the side, winter blue eyes. She'd looked into those eyes 1,000 times, watched them follow her down orphanage hallways during bedtime rounds, seen them light up when she'd sneak extra cookies from the kitchen. The cloth slipped from her fingers. She moved closer. Her gloved hand reached toward the frame without permission from her brain. The detail was extraordinary. Every strand of hair. The slight upturn at the corner of his mouth. The way his shoulders sat rigid, like he was trying to be brave. And there, on his left hand, resting against his knee, a small crescent-shaped scar near his thumb. The scar he'd gotten climbing the orphanage fence when he was 5. She'd bandaged it herself while he tried not to cry. Michael. His name barely made it past her lips. Admiring the new portrait? Grace spun around. Edward Hawthorne stood in the doorway. 6 feet of tailored navy suit and the kind of calm that felt dangerous. Her heart hammered. "Sir, I apologize. It's fine." He stepped into the room. Italian leather on Persian rug, barely a sound. "You're not the first to find it. Striking." She chose her words carefully. "May I ask who the boy is?" Something crossed his face, quick, almost invisible. "My son, Daniel." His voice softened slightly. "He passed away 10 years ago." The floor tilted. Passed away. 10 years ago. Grace looked back at the portrait. The night of the storm flashed through her mind. The black sedan outside St. Catherine's. The empty bed the next morning. Police saying Michael probably ran away, even though he'd left his stuffed rabbit tucked under his pillow. "Sir!" Her voice cracked. "I don't mean to overstep, but that boy." "I knew him." Hawthorne's expression hardened. "I think you're mistaken." "I'm not." The words came faster now. "I worked at St. Catherine's. That child lived there. I tucked him in every night for 2 years. He had a scar on his hand, right?" "That's enough." The command cut through the study. Grace flinched but held her ground. "Please, just listen." "You saw nothing." He took a step closer. His voice dropped to something quieter than anger, which made it worse. "Do you understand me, Miss Mitchell?" "Nothing." He walked out. The door clicked shut. Grace stood there, staring at the portrait. At the boy's painted hand and that unmistakable scar. Her palm pressed against her chest, heart racing. The child she'd lost might still be alive. That night, Grace lay on the narrow bed in the servants' quarters. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked. 10 years ago, she'd been 24, working double shifts at St. Catherine's because the state kept cutting their funding. The building had been old, drafty windows, temperamental heating. But the children didn't care. To them, it was home. Michael had arrived when he was 4, found wandering alone near a bus station. No identification, no family, just a scared little boy who didn't speak for 3 months. Grace had been the one to coax him out of silence, singing lullabies, reading stories, letting him help in the kitchen. Eventually, he'd started calling her Miss Grace. His voice tentative, like he was testing whether she'd disappear too. She remembered the couple who came that stormy October night, expensive coats, polite smiles. They'd asked to see the new arrivals, which had struck her as odd. Most prospective parents wanted to meet all the children. The next morning, Michael's bed was empty. The police investigation lasted 3 days. They'd questioned everyone, searched the property, reviewed what little security footage existed. The official conclusion: probable runaway. But Grace knew better. Michael was afraid of the dark. He wouldn't run. Now, 10 years later, his face hung in a mansion 20 miles from that orphanage, claimed as the dead son of one of the state's wealthiest families. By dawn, Grace had made her decision. The next morning, the kitchen buzzed with controlled chaos. Crystal champagne flutes, white orchids and roses, silver trays polished to mirrors. Victoria Hawthorne descended the main staircase like she was granting an audience. At 60, she was still striking. Silver hair in an elegant chignon, a dove-gray dress that probably cost more than Grace's yearly salary. Diamonds at her throat and wrists. "Vaughn," she called, her voice carrying that particular authority old money has, "ensure the champagne is properly chilled. Edward's business partners expect nothing less." Grace kept her head down, arranging canapes on porcelain plates. Victoria's gaze swept the kitchen. Paused on Grace. "You're the new girl." "Yes, ma'am. Grace Mitchell." Victoria studied her with eyes that calculated value and threat simultaneously. "You've been adequate so far. See that you remain so. My husband doesn't tolerate disruptions." "Of course, ma'am." Victoria moved on. Left behind expensive perfume and subtle warning. 20 minutes later, while Grace cleaned the hallway leading to the private wing, a young woman passed by, early 20s, carrying white lilies. She had her mother's elegant features but softer eyes. "Excuse me," Grace said quietly. "Miss Hawthorne?" The girl turned, surprised but not unfriendly. "Yes?" "I'm Grace, new here. I was cleaning your father's study yesterday. The portrait of the boy." The girl's expression shifted, something between sadness and resignation. "My brother." Grace's pulse quickened. "May I ask what happened, if it's not too personal?" The girl, Sarah, sighed. "He drowned, at our summer home in the Northeast. I was only 8, but I remember that day." She paused. "They never found his body. The ocean doesn't always give back what it takes." "Never found his body." Ice spread through Grace's veins. "I'm sorry for your loss." Sarah nodded, her eyes distant. "My father doesn't talk about it. Ever. Mother tried for years, but he'd just shut down. That portrait appeared last month. First time in 10 years he's acknowledged Daniel existed." She walked away. Grace stood in the hallway, puzzle pieces clicking together. A boy who drowned but left no body. A child who vanished from an orphanage on a stormy night. A portrait commissioned a decade after death, with details too specific, too recent. Someone took him. And now she knew who. That night, Grace waited until midnight. Until Victoria's bedroom light went dark. Until she was certain she was alone with the mansion's secrets. She slipped into the study. Her small flashlight cast shadows across leather-bound books and mahogany furniture. The portrait seemed to glow in the darkness. Grace knelt before it, examining the frame inch by inch. That's when she noticed them. Faint scratches in the wallpaper beside the frame, nearly invisible unless you were looking. Her fingers traced the pattern. The wallpaper gave slightly. A seam. Her mind flashed back to the morning she'd cleaned Hawthorne's desk, the mysterious brass key in the bottom drawer. Small and old. Hadn't fit any of the study's obvious locks. She'd returned it to the drawer, but she'd also noted its exact placement. 3 minutes later, key in hand, Grace was back at the wall panel. The key slid into the hidden lock, soft click that sounded deafening in the silent room. The panel swung open. Grace stepped through. The space was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet, tucked behind the study wall like a secret the house was ashamed to keep. What filled it made her blood run cold. A child's room, but wrong, preserved like a museum exhibit. A single bed with military-precise blue sheets, a small desk with crayons scattered across it, toys lined up on a shelf, teddy bear missing one eye, wooden blocks, toy car with one wheel gone, everything coated in dust, except for fresh footprints leading to and from the desk. Someone's been here recently. The walls were covered in drawings, dozens of them, taped up in overlapping layers, stick figures drawn by a child's hand, a woman with a frown, a man with angry slashes for eyes, a boy, always small, always alone in the corner of the page. Beneath one drawing, written in shaky pencil, "If I'm quiet, maybe she won't cry." Grace's hand covered her mouth. On the desk sat a wooden box, ornately carved but locked with a simple latch. Inside, photographs, dozens of them, children, all between 4 and 8 years old, all with the same official stamp on the back, St. Catherine's Orphanage. Grace recognized 5 faces, children who'd vanished over a 3-year period, cases that went cold, lives that simply ended in paperwork. Oh, God! The whisper escaped her. How many? "You shouldn't have found this room." Grace spun. Victoria Hawthorne stood in the doorway, wrapped in a silk robe, face pale but composed, like someone who'd been expecting this moment for years. "Mrs. Hawthorne." "I warned Edward." Victoria stepped inside, closed the hidden door behind her. "I told him that portrait was a mistake, that someone would eventually recognize the resemblance. But he insisted, said it was time to stop hiding." Grace's back pressed against the desk. "These children, what did you do?" Victoria's composure cracked for just a second, a tremor in her hand, a flicker of something human beneath the ice. "You couldn't possibly understand. Try me." Silence stretched between them. Then Victoria spoke, her voice hollow. "Our son, our real son, Daniel, died when he was 7. Pneumonia, sudden and brutal. Edward found him after he'd just gone to sleep. We thought it was a fever." Grace said nothing. Let the woman continue. "Edward couldn't accept it. Wouldn't. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating. I'd find him standing in Daniel's room at 3 in the morning, just staring at the empty bed. The doctors called it complicated grief. I called it madness. So he replaced him." Grace's voice was steady despite the horror in her stomach. Victoria's laugh was bitter, broken. "I told myself it was Mercy, the boy from the orphanage. He looked so much like Daniel. Same age, same coloring, and he'd have such a better life with us. Education, opportunities, everything he could never have had. You stole his identity. We gave him a life." Victoria's voice rose. "Do you know what would have happened to him? Aging out of the system, probably ending up on the streets. We offered love, stability. You offered a lie." Grace stepped forward, her fear transforming into something else. "You locked him away, erased who he was. And when one wasn't enough, you took others. How many, Victoria? How many children did you steal to fill the hole your son left?" Victoria's face crumpled. Tears streamed down her carefully made-up face. 6 over 3 years, but only 1 stayed." "Michael." Victoria's eyes widened slightly at the name. "We called him Daniel. We thought if we just loved him enough, if we gave him everything, he'd forget. He'd become our son." "Where is he now?" "A facility, upstate. After he tried to run away for the 4th time, Edward said it was for his own protection, for his mental health." Victoria's voice dropped to a whisper. "I haven't seen him in 6 years." Grace felt sick. "And the others?" "Returned to the system under different circumstances, relocated out of state. We made sure they were placed in better homes. You destroyed their lives." "I know," Victoria's scream echoed in the small room. "I know what we did. I know it was wrong. But I couldn't stop him, and then I couldn't stop myself. It became routine, a way to make him happy again, and I just—" She collapsed against the wall, sobbing. Grace stared at her. This woman who had everything and still took more. "You can't keep this secret anymore. Please." Victoria looked up, her carefully constructed elegance completely shattered. "It will destroy us, our family name, our reputation." "Good," Grace's voice was steel. Maybe it should be destroyed. The flashlight beam flickered between them, then a shadow filled the doorway. Edward Hawthorne stood there, something metallic glinting in his hand. A gun. Grace froze. Victoria gasped, pushed herself upright. "Edward, no!" "I warned her." His voice was eerily calm, the voice of a man who'd already decided what came next. "I gave her a chance to walk away." "You don't have to do this," Grace said, forced her voice steady. "You can still end this the right way. Turn yourself in. Tell the truth. Let those children have their names back." Their names? Edward's laugh was hollow. Those children were nothing. No one wanted them. No one cared when they disappeared. We gave them purpose. You gave them trauma. His hand tightened on the gun. You'll ruin everything. Everything I've built. Everything I've protected. Grace's mind raced. The room had one exit, blocked by Edward. No windows, no weapons, just her, two broken people and the ghosts of stolen children. Edward raised the gun, his hand trembling. "Edward!" Victoria's voice cracked. "She's just a girl trying to do the right thing. Don't add murder to what we've already done." "We've come too far to stop now." The gun steadied, pointing at Grace's chest. Time slowed. Grace saw Victoria move, saw her step between the barrel and its target, saw Edward's face change from cold resolve to horror. The gunshot was deafening. Victoria crumpled. Edward caught her. The gun clattered to the floor, his face transforming into something beyond grief. "No, no, no. Victoria, I didn't. I wasn't." Grace didn't wait. She grabbed the wooden box of photographs and ran, slipped past Edward as he cradled his dying wife, his walls finally crumbling. She heard his anguished scream as she burst through the study, heard her own footsteps pounding down the marble hallway, heard sirens beginning to wail in the distance, and she heard Victoria's final words following her into the night. "Tell them the truth." At the iron gates, Grace stood, chest heaving. The wooden box clutched against her like a shield. Blue and red lights strobed across the mansion's facade as police cars screeched to a stop. Behind her, the front door burst open. Edward Hawthorne stumbled out, hands covered in blood, face frozen in shock. "She's dead," he said to no one. "Victoria's dead. I didn't mean... I was trying to..." Officers surrounded him, weapons drawn, voices overlapping in commands. Grace watched as they forced him to his knees, as handcuffs clicked around his wrists, as the man who'd built an empire on lies finally broke. A detective approached Grace, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes. "Ma'am, are you injured?" "No." Grace thrust the box toward her. "But you need to see this. All of it." 3 months later, the mansion's secrets were finally on the front page. Grace walked down sanitized hallways of a private psychiatric facility upstate, the kind of place where wealthy families hid their complicated problems. Michael, officially still Daniel Hawthorne Jr. until the courts finalized his restored identity, had been here for 6 years. 6 years of isolation, therapy, medication, and the systematic erasure of who he'd been. The orderly led her to a common room. He doesn't talk much. Sometimes he'll draw, but mostly he just sits. Grace saw him before he saw her. 17 now. Tall and painfully thin, his blonde hair longer and unkempt. He sat by a window, staring at nothing, his hands folded in his lap with that same rigid posture from the portrait. "Michael?" He didn't turn at first. Then, slowly, his head moved. Their eyes met. Grace watched recognition struggle through layers of confusion and medication. She pulled out a photograph, creased and faded, but precious. A crayon drawing, a woman with a huge smile, the words, "Miss Grace is the best," written in backwards letters. "You drew this for me," she said softly, walking closer. "Christmas, when you were 6. You were so proud when you finished it." He stared at the drawing. His hand reached out, trembling. taking the paper like it might disintegrate. "I remember," he whispered. "You sang to me. Every night. You had nightmares about the dark. They told me." His eyes filled with tears. "They told me you didn't want me anymore. That's why I was chosen. Why I was special." "That was a lie, Michael." Grace knelt in front of him, took his hands. "I searched for you. For years. I never stopped looking." A sound escaped him, something between a sob and a gasp. 10 years of confusion, of forced identity, of wondering why he felt wrong in his own skin. It all broke through in that moment. He collapsed forward and Grace caught him, holding him the way she used to when he was small and scared. "You're safe now," she whispered. "You're coming home." 6 months after that, spring had finally come to St. Catherine's. The old building looked different in daylight, less haunting, more hopeful. Fresh paint covered old cracks. New windows gleamed. The fence had been repaired. The yard transformed into a proper playground. A new sign hung above the entrance. The Catherine. Home for lost children. Every child deserves their true name. Grace stood on the front steps, watching children play. Some new, some returned from other facilities, all searching for what had been taken from them. Donors had come forward after the scandal broke. The state allocated emergency funding. Even some of the Hawthorne fortune, what remained after legal fees and restitution, had been redirected here by court order. But Grace hadn't reopened the home for money or recognition. She'd done it for the ones who never came back, for the 5 other children whose photographs sat in that wooden box, for every missing child whose case went cold because society had decided they didn't matter enough. Michael appeared beside her, a sketch pad under his arm. He'd been living at the home for 4 months now, slowly rediscovering who he'd been before Edward Hawthorne stole his identity. "What are you drawing?" Grace asked. He opened the pad. Charcoal sketches of faces. Children he remembered from his original time here, mixed with new faces from the reopened home. At the bottom of the page he'd written in careful letters, "People who made it out." Grace's throat tightened. "It's beautiful." "Miss Grace?" His voice was still tentative, still testing whether this reality would last. "Do you think the others, the ones who were taken, do you think they'll find their way back too?" She thought of the police investigation still ongoing, of the 5 children now in various stages of reclaiming their identities, of the long road ahead for all of them. "I think," she said carefully, "that as long as someone remembers their real names, they're never completely lost." Michael nodded, understanding more than words could say. That evening, as the sun set across the sky, Grace stood in what used to be the director's office. On her desk sat a photograph, not the portrait from the mansion, but a new one she'd commissioned. Michael smiling, genuinely smiling, standing in front of the orphanage with other children, all of them safe, all of them home. In the corner she'd written a small inscription. Michael Chen, found 2024. His real name, his real year of freedom. Grace lit a candle and placed it beside the photograph, watched the flame flicker in the growing darkness. "Welcome home," she whispered. Outside, children's laughter drifted through open windows. The sound of lives being lived on their own terms, identities restored, futures reclaimed. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's just the quiet act of giving the lost their names back. If this story stayed with you, hit that subscribe button. Stories like this don't tell themselves. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Every view, every comment reminds me why these stories matter. Because somewhere out there, someone is still waiting to hear their real name again.